Good evening, everyone. I'm the storyteller, and I'm here to help you fall asleep with these road trip horror stories. So before we get started, be sure to subscribe to the channel and like the video Idel. Hope to know where you're from and what time you're watching this. So leave in the comments when you're ready to get comfortable and relax. I first met Daniel when I needed a roommate to share rent in a small 2-bedroom apartment. Rent prices were high, and I couldn't afford to live alone. Daniel responded to my post, and from our first meet, he seemed like a kind, normal person. He had a polite manner, a friendly smile, and a calm voice. I quickly felt at ease with him, and we decided to move in together. Early on, everything was peaceful. He was tidy and helpful, sometimes cooking meals or fixing small problems. In the beginning, living with Daniel was enjoyable. We both had jobs in the same part of town. He worked at a small bookstore, and I worked at a nearby coffee shop. In the evenings, we'd watch movies together or share stories about our days. On occasion, he surprised me with dinner or offered to cover chores I disliked, like taking out the trash. We split expenses and responsibilities without a problem, and I thought we got along better than most roommates I know. For a while, everything seemed perfectly normal, but then things started to change. Daniel began coming home later, sometimes looking tired or distant. When I asked where he'd been, he'd shrug and say he was with friends, but his tone fell off. There were nights when I'd hear him on the phone, speaking in a low voice. Once I caught him saying something about risk and people not finding out. I tried to convince myself it was just a misunderstanding. Daniel was turning secretive and unsettling one night. I arrived home later than usual and found the apartment dark except for a dim light in Daniel's room. As I passed by, I heard a soft noise like quiet sobbing. I knocked on his door and asked if he was okay. He took a long moment to answer before saying he was just tired and wanted to sleep. The crying stopped as abruptly as it began, and the silence left me feeling uneasy the next morning. He acted perfectly normal again. The odd happenings kept piling up. I started noticing stains on his clothes that he tried to hide. Once I found a small knife with dried blood on it in our bathroom cabinet when I asked about it. Daniel claimed he had cut his hand while preparing food and laughed off my concern, but something inside me felt wrong. Over time, I grew more anxious around him. I told myself it was just my imagination, but my gut told me otherwise. There was a heaviness in our apartment that I couldn't. My suspicions eventually pushed me to invade Daniel's privacy. One night, when he went out, I went into his room. My heart pounded as I looked through his things until I found a box hidden under some clothes. Inside were newspaper clippings about unsolved murders. Some pages had Daniel's handwritten notes in the margins, and there were photos of victims and odd personal items. I felt my stomach lurch as I realized this was more than just simple curiosity. Shaking with fear, I put everything. When officers arrived, I led them to the box. They seemed worried as well and began asking me about Daniel's behavior and schedule. I mentioned the stained clothes, the bloody knife, and his late-night phone calls. After gathering information, they advised me to stay somewhere safe while they investigated. Scared and overwhelmed, I stayed with a friend and tried to carry on with my daily life. But my thoughts were filled with dread and confusion. I couldn't believe my friendly police officer. Too strong to deny. Days later, the police contacted me again with alarming news. They had arrested Daniel. He was caught trying to dispose of belongings lent to another victim. The evidence from our apartment plus what he was carrying connected him to several unsolved murders. I felt both relief and shock knowing that I had shared a home with a dangerous murderer. Memories of Daniel's kindness clashed with a horrific truth. My mind reeled at how I had missed the warnings. Had cooked, talked, or laughed together. It was terrifying to realize how easily I had been duped. Returning to the apartment to pack my belongings was one of the hardest things I have ever done. The rooms felt eerie, as if they still held the echoes of Daniel's secrets. As I sorted through my things, I found a note from him in my room. It read, "I'm sorry you found out this way. I never wanted to hurt you. You were the only Our friend." I had goodbye. My hands trembled as I read those. Manipulation. Either way, it left me feeling torn, frightened, and strangely sad. Not long after, I moved away to another city, trying to start over. But the memories haunted me. I grew more cautious and fearful, no longer trusting people at face value. Although I know I'm not to blame for Daniel's actions, I still wonder if I could have acted sooner. Maybe saving lives the darkness I lived with remains a part of me, a reminder that evil can hide behind a friendly smile, even now I could. Signs of danger living with Daniel changed my life forever, and I will never forget it. Before we dive into the next story, if you're visiting our channel for the first time, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and turn on the bell icon to stay updated with our upcoming scary stories. I was 30 when I decided to find a cheaper place to live. My old apartment was becoming too expensive, and I needed a quick solution. One day, I spotted an advertisement for a room in a 3-bedroom. Many questions. He did not even do background checks. I found that strange, but I was in a hurry and could not afford to be picky. The house was old with creaking floors and narrow halls. But it felt comfortable enough for my needs. When I first toured the place, Mr. Thompson showed me the layout: 3 bedrooms, a small kitchen, a cozy living room, and 1 bathroom to share. He barely spoke about rules or expectations. I only knew I would have one roommate named Elizabeth. That new room, I felt a slight chill in the air, but told myself it was just an old house settling around me. Elise. Beth worked at night and slept during the day. Because of her schedule, we hardly crossed paths. During my first month there, her door was always closed, and I rarely heard a sound coming from her room out. Though she seemed to keep to herself, I sometimes felt as if there was another presence in the house, like someone watching from a hiding place. Uneasy about living with a stranger I never saw. Soon after I settled in, and odd things began to happen. I would place my keys on the kitchen counter, then later find them on the dining table. My toothbrush, which I kept in a cup by the sink, sometimes felt damp when I hadn't used it. I tried to think of logical explanations. Perhaps I was stressed and forgetting where I placed things. Maybe the house had small leaks or drafts that made items shift, but as days passed it became difficult. I returned from work and noticed the front door was slightly open. I was certain I had locked it that morning. My tea began to pound. I stepped inside carefully and called out, "Hello, is anyone here?" The house was quiet, but there was a tense quality to the silence. Nothing seemed stolen or moved, yet I felt as if someone had been there just moments before. That night, I triple-checked every window and door, making sure each lock was secure. Still, as I tried to sleep, every creak. Sometimes they sounded like light footsteps coming from the second floor, and other times I heard a gentle humming, almost like a lullaby. These sounds froze me in my bed. I kept telling myself it was just an old house, but I couldn't ignore the uneasy feeling crawling up my spine. Even if Elizabeth was home, why would she walk around when she was supposed to be at work? And if she wasn't there, who was making those sounds? Then came a Friday night that changed everything. Distracted sipping some tea, when I suddenly felt as though I was being watched. My skin prickled. I glanced over my shoulder, but saw nothing. Trying to stay calm, I looked back at the television. Without warning, the overhead light flickered and went out, leaving only the dim glow from the TV. My stomach tightened. I turned around slowly, and in the doorway, saw a figure. It was Elizabeth. She stood in the a dowy hallway, her face hidden in the dark. I couldn't see her eyes clearly. Turned and silently disappeared down the hall, leaving me shaken. "Elizabeth," the first called out, my voice trembling. There was no reply. Fear rushed through me, and I hurried to switch the lights back on. Everything felt surreal. I ran to my bedroom and locked the door, my thoughts racing with questions. Who exactly was she, and why did her presence feel so unsettling that night? I barely slept. Every rustle in the hallway sent chills through me. By the morning, I was certain I needed to get away. Craving a sense of safety. Once I was there, I called Mr. Thompson and told him about the eerie events, including Elizabeth standing in the dark. He sounded worried, but not surprised. He asked if I was okay, yet he offered no real answer. Something in his voice made me think he knew more than he was telling. After a much-needed rest at the motel, I decided to return to the house the next day to gather the rest of my things. As I stepped inside the house, it felt different. It was quiet. Personal items. On my way out, I noticed Elizabeth's door was slightly open. My curiosity got the best of me, and I pushed it wider. The room was dim, covered in dust, as if nobody had lived there for a very long time. A small bed stood against one wall, and old photographs hung near it. Stepping closer, I saw that the photos showed a young woman who looked exactly like Elizabeth in one picture. Mr. Thompson stood next to her, much younger than he was now. Curious, I flipped these pictures were so old. How could Elizabeth still look the same today? Suddenly, I heard a faint creak behind me and spun around. But no one was there. Gripped by fear, I grabbed a photograph and dashed out of the house, determined to confront Mr. Thompson. I went straight to his office and showed him the picture. He grew pale and thin. Ally confessed that Elizabeth was his sister who had disappeared 2 decades ago. He admitted he kept her room untouched, hoping she would return, had appeared in the house, or why she looked unchanged. After so many years, frightened and confused, I took my things and left, vowing never to return. I never imagined that moving into a small apartment in the city would lead me to such a terrifying EXP. Arians had started very simply. I was excited to find a place with low rent and a location close to my new job. I thought life would be easy and peaceful, but I was wrong. My roommate Alex turned out to be. He's someone I will never forget. He was tall and thin with eyes that seemed to look far beyond me, as if he saw things I could not. In the beginning, I told myself he was just shy or preferred solitude. He spent almost all of his time in his bedroom with the door locked. He rarely came out, and when he did not speak much for a while. I tried to believe that we simply had different habits and that living together would become more comfortable over time, but it did not. At night, I occasionally heard Alex whisper the phone, but as the nights passed, these whispers became louder and more urgent. As Thug H.E. were in deep conversation with someone or something that was not in the room. I told myself not to worry. Perhaps he was just watching scary movies or practicing lines for a play. I tried to ignore the growing unease in my stomach. Strange odors began to drift from Alex's room. It started as a mild, unpleasant smell, but soon became so strong that I couldn't pretend it was normal. When I asked Alex about it, he laughed in a strange, hollow way. He said he had spilled something and would clean it soon, but the smell never went away. If anything, it got worse. I also noticed the way Alex seemed to glide through the apartment. He moved so quietly that I sometimes didn't realize he was standing right behind me late at night. When I woke up to get a drink of water, I'd see him in the hallway, his eyes dark and cold. And back in my room one night, when I couldn't sleep, I decided to find out what Alex was doing as quietly as I could. I walked to his door, which was slightly open, and a sliver of light spilled out into the dark hallway. My heart was pounding, but I pushed the door a bit wider. Inside, I saw Alex standing in the center of the room, surrounded by lit candles, their flickering flames making giant shadows dance on the walls. Alex was holding an old yellowed book and chanting in a sounded like a foreign language, or perhaps no language at all. The air felt heavy, like something dark and dangerous was hovering in the room. Suddenly, I noticed a shape in the corner. It was hunched over and twisted with eyes that glowed in the candlelight. The sight made my heart skip a beat, and I stumbled back in fear. Without thinking, I turned Ned and ran to my bedroom. Slamming the door behind me, I hid under my blankets, trembling, praying that dawn would come soon and make everything better. But things did not improve. They got worse. Alex became more unpredictable. Louis' whispers were louder and more frequent, and he hardly seemed to eat or sleep. He would stare at me for long periods, like he was studying me. One evening, I gathered the courage to ask him what was going on, but he only stared through me and said nothing at all. Then, one night, Alex simply vanished. His bedroom was empty, the candles were blown out, and the strange book was gone. But he was nowhere to be found. I should have felt believed, but a feeling of dread clung to me. It felt like he was still around, watching me from somewhere I couldn't see. Days turned into weeks, and there was still no sign of Alex. I tried to go on with my normal routine of working, cooking, and sleeping, but each time I entered the apartment, a sense of unease covered me like a dark cloud. I would jump at small sounds and glance over my shoulder, expecting Alex to be there. A faint scraping noise inside the walls. At first, I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was just a mouse or a rat, but the noise grew louder and more persistent until it became impossible to block out. It sounded like Omething with sharp claws scraping against the inside of the wall, trying to break through. Before long, the creatures appeared. They crawled out of dark corners, their bodies contorted in unnatural shapes, their eyes glowing with an intense, frightening light eye. There were so many of them, and they all seemed to look right at me. It felt like they were waiting for a command, like I was a trapped animal in a cage. At that moment, I realized I had to escape. I grabbed my keys and dashed for the door. But then I saw him. Alex stood in the doorway, blocking my path. His face looked paler than before, and his eyes emptier than I had ever seen. "You can't leave," he said, like a judge delivering a sentence. "You belong to us." Now terror gripped me, and my pulse raced, and I could not breathe as I walked down the COR. Ryder and out of the building, never looking back.